My name is Ethan, and last winter I learned the hard way that isolation can become something far worse than peace and quiet. I'd taken my wife, Sarah, to the Colorado mountains for a photography project. Snow, light, silence, all the things my work thrived on. She wanted skiing, I wanted solitude. So we compromised and rented a tiny remote cabin instead of staying at a resort. The place wasn't glamorous, 4 rooms, creaking floors, a cheap gas fireplace, but it had charm. It was tucked deep into the pines at the end of a half-mile unpaved road. No neighbors, no noise, no light except what we brought with us. For the first few days, it was perfect. She skied. I took photos. We cooked simple dinners and went to sleep early. The cabin felt like a cozy retreat from reality. Then the storm hit. Mountain storms are different, louder, thicker, more suffocating. It began as a soft snowfall, but by noon, the world outside turned into a whiteout wall. Snow climbed 3 feet up the door. The windows iced over so deeply that we couldn't see more than a faint blue blur of daylight. We were trapped, though we never used the word. Sarah shrugged it off. "Wine and Scrabble," she said cheerfully. I tried to relax, but storms always did weird things to my nerves. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen, I noticed something small but jarring. My camera bag wasn't where I left it. I'd set it right beside the mudroom door when we came in. Now it sat in the middle of the doorway, like someone had dragged it out and dropped it. "Did you move this?" I asked Sarah. "Nope." "Did you kick it with your boot?" "Maybe I did." She shook her head. The bag was heavy canvas with steel buckles. It wouldn't have slid on its own. Still, I chalked it up to uneven floors and forced myself not to overthink it. But the next night, something else happened. Around 3 a.m., I got up for the bathroom. The cabin was pitch black, except for a sliver of moonlight bleeding through the ice-covered windows. As I walked through the living room, my eyes locked on something hanging under the wall thermostat, a small wooden pine tree carving we'd bought at a roadside stand on the way up. I remembered putting it in my shaving kit. In the bathroom, I touched it. It was swinging slightly, as if recently placed. I found my shaving kit open. The carving was missing. I woke Sarah, whispering as calmly as I could. "Did you hang that wooden tree in the living room?" She groaned, barely awake. "No, Ethan. Go back to sleep." That stone-cold denial hit me hard. Someone had moved something while we slept. I put the carving back where it belonged, but sleep didn't come easy after that. I told myself I was being paranoid. The next day proved I wasn't. The storm had finally stopped. The sun fought through the clouds, faint but enough to light the world. I stepped out to capture the cabin under a fresh layer of snow. Everything looked untouched, beautiful, clean, until I walked around back. Just beneath the mudroom window was a set of footprints. One set, one person. Heavy, deep, fresh. They weren't mine. They weren't Sarah's. And based on the sharp edges, they'd been made recently, likely that morning. Someone had walked right up to our cabin during the storm, stood outside the window, and then walked back into the forest. My breath fogged in front of me. The silence turned threatening. Inside, Sarah didn't panic. She didn't believe me. "Probably a ranger checking on the property," she said. "In boots that big, standing at the mudroom window? It's the wilderness, Ethan. Don't overreact." That dismissal snapped something in me. I threw my boots back on and stomped outside. If she wouldn't believe me, I'd gather proof myself. I followed the prints into the woods. They led straight and deliberate, as if the person had known exactly where they were going. They brought me to a rocky ridge overlooking our cabin, an almost perfect vantage point. And then the tracks just ended. No return prints. No scramble marks. No path forward. The final set of deep impressions simply stopped at the edge of the ridge, like the person had stepped to the ledge, looked down at our home, and vanished. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. The woods had gone silent. Too silent. I retreated to the cabin fast, slamming the door behind me. "That's it," I said. "We're leaving." Before Sarah could respond, the ceiling lights flickered twice, then went black. The gas fireplace sputtered and died, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt physical. "Power outage," Sarah whispered, though her voice had finally lost its calm. And then we heard it. A scraping sound. Slow, heavy, deliberate, coming from the roof. Someone was walking above us. We froze. The footsteps dragged across the metal roof, scraping long, rough grooves. Then came a thud, a low grunt, a strained breath. "Someone's on the cabin," I whispered, gripping Sarah's arm. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both heard the next sound clearly. Floorboards creaking in the mudroom. Inside the cabin, right next to the kitchen, the mudroom door latch rattled softly, testing. Not forcing, testing. Whoever it was wasn't afraid of being heard. We backed into the bedroom, barricading the door with the wooden dresser. I grabbed the fireplace poker as a weapon. The silence outside the room was worse than any noise, thick, expectant. Then came the soft thudding, not trying to break in, just knocking. Announcing. And beneath it, a whisper, a quiet, stretched-out murmur, slow and intimate, like someone breathing a secret directly through the crack under the door. "Eitan." My blood turned to ice. We stayed like that until morning. When we finally opened the door, the cabin was empty except for one thing. In the center of the mudroom, placed upright like a gift, was a giant snow-covered boot, exactly the size of the prints outside. We didn't pack carefully. We didn't clean. We sprinted to the car, hearts hammering. As we reached the tree line, Sarah touched my arm. "Ethan, look." Nailed to a pine tree was our small wooden carving, but someone had carved a stick figure into it. A stick figure with a perfectly hollow circle for a head. We left Colorado and never returned. But even now, sometimes I still hear that whisper behind me when a room gets too quiet. "Eitan." We left the mountain that morning like people fleeing a burning house. Neither of us said a word during the drive. It wasn't until we reached the nearest town 2 hours and one terrifyingly silent road later that Sarah finally spoke. Whoever that was, they were watching us. It was the first time she acknowledged it, but hearing her say it didn't make me feel better. It made everything worse. We got a hotel room and spent the day pretending to rest. I sat on the edge of the bed, replaying the sound that had haunted us all night. The soft rhythmic thud, 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 followed by the whisper that curled like frozen breath through the doorframe. "Eitan." Someone knew my name. Someone had stood outside our bedroom door in the dark, whispering it. Someone big enough to leave deep boot prints in 3 feet of snow. And someone patient enough to stand on our roof, wait for the power to die, and enjoy the silent terror of watching us break. We went home the next morning, but home didn't feel like home anymore. For weeks, I would wake up at random hours, convinced I'd heard that same soft dragging of boots across a roof, or the faint whisper of my name drifting through the hallway. My wife told me it was trauma. My therapist said it was a stress response. But late one night, as I sat in the dark editing photos, I heard something from the living room, a soft shift of weight on the floorboards. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough. I grabbed the nearest object, a chair, and crept toward the sound. But when I flicked on the light, nothing was there. No one. The house was still. Except my camera bag had moved again. Not far, just rotated, like someone had knelt beside it. Examined it, placed it back carefully. I told myself it was Sarah. I told myself anything I needed to stay sane. But doubt was rooting itself in my chest, spreading slow and cold like frost. A few days later, something happened that made me realize the cabin incident hadn't ended in Colorado. Sarah and I had gone to the grocery store. When we returned, there was something placed neatly on our welcome mat. The snow-covered boot, the exact same boot from the cabin. Frozen, heavy, and upright. Sarah screamed. I felt my blood solidify. There was no rational explanation for it. We hadn't brought it home. It had been left in the cabin, sitting in the mudroom. And now it was at our front door, 900 miles away. On the boot's toe, carved deep through the frozen leather, was a familiar shape, a stick figure with a hollow circle for a head, just like the carving nailed to the pine tree. We called the police this time. 2 officers came, looked at the boot, asked us a few questions, and wrote down our statements with bored expressions. They theorized it was some disturbed hiker from Colorado who followed us home. But they didn't believe that theory, and neither did we. We got cameras installed, alarm systems, motion lights. For a while, that gave me a little peace, until one night the alarm didn't go off, but someone still got onto our porch. It happened at 3:17 a.m. I woke up to a sound that snapped every nerve in my body awake. A whisper, not outside, not in the hallway, But on the other side of our bedroom window, Eitan, Sarah grabbed my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. Then came the scraping. Long, slow, deliberate drags across the siding, exactly like the scraping we heard on the cabin roof. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, but before I could dial, the sound stopped. We stayed frozen until dawn. In the morning, I walked outside with shaking legs. There were no footprints in the grass, no marks in the dirt, no sign anyone had been there. But carved into the frost on our bedroom window were 3 letters: ETH, and the hollow circle. I didn't go back inside right away. I stood in the driveway, staring at the frost carving, trying to piece together something that made sense. The cabin, the moved objects, the prints that ended on a ridge, the whispers, the scraping, the boot that followed us across states, the figure carved into wood, and now my initials carved into my own house. None of this was random. None of it was impulsive. This wasn't a hiker or an intruder. This was someone with patience. Obsessive patience. Someone who enjoyed watching fear grow layer by layer. I went inside and packed. We moved in with my brother, then we moved again, then again. 3 times in 6 months. Every new place was further away, more crowded, more monitored. Cameras, locks, dogs, you name it. But paranoia is a poison that doesn't fade. In every new house, I'd wake up some nights convinced I heard that same soft knocking on the walls. Sometimes I'd hear snow sliding off the roof and freeze in terror. Sometimes I'd see a tall shape in the corner of my eye when I looked at reflective surfaces, something with broad shoulders and a stillness too familiar to ignore. But the worst moment came last week. Sarah and I had finally started to feel normal again. We'd been living in a townhouse for 4 months, our longest stretch without incident. We even laughed again, watched movies again, slept with the lights off again. But on Tuesday morning, Sarah found something sitting at the base of our stairs. The wooden pine tree carving. Our carving, the one that had been defaced in Colorado. But this time, the hollow circle wasn't empty. A single word had been etched into it. Window. My veins flooded with ice. Window. Where he whispered. Where he carved my initials. Where he stood, unseen. When I read that word, something inside me collapsed. The realization settled like a stone in my stomach. He hadn't lost us. He hadn't stopped. He had only waited, watched, studied, and he wanted us to know it. Now, every night, I lie awake listening for whispers in the walls. Every time a branch scrapes the siding, my whole body stiffens. Every reflective surface I pass, I check the corners for a tall, unmoving silhouette. I don't know what he wants. I don't know why us. I don't even know if he's fully human. But I know one thing with a certainty that keeps me awake at night. He'll come back during the next storm. And this time, he won't whisper from the other side of the door. He'll whisper from the inside. I've spent 2 decades on the road as a regional sales rep. Long highways, long winters, and long stretches of nothing but snow-covered plains. I thought I'd seen every kind of Midwest nightmare the weather could throw at me. But last winter proved I hadn't seen anything. My name's Mark, and this happened during a drive from Minneapolis to Fargo with a new hire named Linda. She was the cheerful type, almost aggressively optimistic. I didn't mind it. It made the hours pass faster. The sky was quiet that morning, a frozen pale blue above endless white fields, the radio buzzing in and out of static. Then the weather alert came. An Alberta clipper was coming earlier than expected. Fast winds, blizzard conditions, near zero visibility. Before we had time to joke about it, it was already on top of us. 1 second we were cruising on dry asphalt. The next, the world vanished in a swirling white hell. I could barely see the hood of my car, and the wind was pushing us side to side like the vehicle weighed nothing. Linda went quiet, gripping the armrest, staring out at nothing but blinding snow. I caught the faded outline of a sign, the junction, a gas station, and motel combo. The kind of place that hadn't been updated since the 80 seconds, and had probably only survived because people like us occasionally got caught in storms. I pulled into the lot at a crawl, snow hammering against the windshield. There was only one operational pump, flickering under a sickly yellow lamp. I stepped out into the storm, the wind cutting across my face like a razor blade. As I started filling up the tank, Linda tapped on the window from inside and pointed. That's when I noticed him, A figure, standing at the very edge of the light, completely still. His outline was rigid, almost unnatural against the blowing snow. I squinted, expecting him to wave or shout for help, but he didn't react at all. He just watched the car, unmoving. "Is that a hitchhiker?" Linda shouted through the cracked window. "I guess," I said. Strange place to be standing. He finally began walking toward us, slow, deliberate steps. As he came closer, details took shape. Tall, bundled in a dark coat, wearing a black knit hat. No backpack. No suitcase. No sign he'd been walking through the storm. And something about him, I don't know how to explain it. He didn't move like a man freezing in a snowstorm. He walked like the cold didn't bother him at all. Linda was already pushing her door open. "We can't leave him out there. He'll die." "Linda, wait," I said, grabbing her arm. Something's off, but she had already made up her mind. He reached the driver's side window and stared in at me. His skin looked pale, too pale. His eyes were sunk into shadow, as if he hadn't slept in days, or like there was nothing behind them at all. I hesitated before cracking the window. "You all right, sir? Where you headed?" For a moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was a rasping whisper. "West. Just west. Cold. We're staying here until the storm passes," I said, nodding toward the cheap motel. "We can take you somewhere tomorrow." He shook his head. "No room, just warmth. Let me wait in the back of the car." Linda didn't hesitate. "Of course! Get in!" My instincts screamed at me. Every internal alarm I had blared in unison, but I didn't want to look like the heartless salesman. I unlocked the door. He climbed in without another word, slumped sideways against the window, and pulled a blanket over his legs. He didn't even close his eyes, just stared out the window at the snow as if watching something out there. We checked into the motel. The clerk barely looked up from his paperwork, neck encased in a medical brace. He gave us 2 adjoining rooms, the only ones that still had working heat. When we told the hitchhiker to come inside, he refused. "Just the car, warm enough." Linda brushed it off as pride or embarrassment. I didn't buy that for a second. She went to her room. I went to mine. But even with the door locked, the curtains drawn, and the television on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Around midnight, I realized I wasn't going to sleep. I decided to grab my emergency flare kit from the trunk, something familiar, something grounding. I stepped outside into the dim walkway, snow drifting in under the flickering lights. As I passed Linda's window, I noticed the curtains slightly parted. She was awake, scrolling on her tablet. Then I reached my car. I leaned toward the back window, expecting to see him asleep. I froze. The blanket was still there, but the hitchhiker was gone. At first I thought he might have gone into the motel without saying anything. Then I noticed something else, something that turned my stomach into ice. The inside of the window was fogged up from the heat, but someone had wiped it clean in small, perfect circles. Not smudges, not streaks, just dozens of deliberate fingertip-sized circles, as if someone had been peering out through them, watching the rooms. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it over the wind. Then I saw it, a motel stationery card, folded and neatly propped against the headrest. I unlocked the car with shaking hands and snatched the note. 4 words: "Your door is unlocked." I felt the blood drain from my body. I didn't look back at the trees. I didn't look for footprints. I just ran. I slammed into my room, locked everything, and started banging on the adjoining door like a madman. "Linda, wake up, something's wrong." Her door clicked open a crack, her face pale and confused. "What happened?" "The hitchhiker, he's gone," I whispered. "He left this." I handed her the note. She stared at it for several long seconds. "What does it mean?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, but deep down I knew. The note wasn't a warning. It was a message, and it meant he'd already been inside. Linda and I stood frozen in that dim, stained motel room, her clutching the note, me staring at the floor like it might open up beneath us. The wind outside wailed through the thin walls, and for a moment neither of us breathed. "Mark," she whispered, "are you sure he didn't just walk off?" I shook my head. He couldn't have. The car doors were locked. I checked. And the windows, those circles he was watching us. We checked both room doors again, deadbolts engaged, security latches slid in place. Nothing looked tampered with, but the fear in my gut wouldn't settle. Linda eventually returned to her room, though she left the connecting door unlocked, just in case. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, listening. The storm had calmed just enough that the motel's creaking became painfully noticeable. Every shift in the building made me flinch. Then it started. A faint scratching beneath the floor. Not the walls. Not outside. Directly below us. At first I thought maybe an animal had crawled under the building. Old places like this always had pests. But Linda's knock came seconds later. "Mark, did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the scratching stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum. It vibrated through the bed frame, up through the floorboards. The sound was strange, too mechanical to be an animal, too irregular to be plumbing. Then came the voice, muffled, wet-sounding, like someone speaking with a soaked cloth over their mouth. "Open, open." Linda's eyes widened with a horror I'd never seen on anyone's face. She backed away from the carpet, shaking her head. "No, no, 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 Mark. There's someone down there." The humming grew louder, angrier. The boards quivered, and then came the crack. A small section of floor between our beds splintered upwards, forming a jagged gap. From that darkness, something pale forced its way through. A finger. Thin, bone-white, trembling, like it was feeling for us. Linda screamed. I shouted. The finger twitched violently, and I could hear the rest of the hand scraping beneath the wood, desperate to push through. I grabbed the heaviest thing near me, my briefcase, and slammed it down with every ounce of strength I had. A sickening crunch. The finger bent, unnaturally, disappearing back into the darkness. Everything went instantly silent. "Run!" I shouted. We didn't stop to think, didn't take luggage. Linda ran to the window and fought with the latch until it snapped open. A blast of snow slammed into the room. She climbed out first. I scrambled after her, scraping my hip on the sill. We landed in a drift, half sinking, then staggered toward the car. The wind whipped around us, and I couldn't help glancing back. Our room window curtain ripped, stood open to the storm, and someone was standing inside. The hitchhiker, dry, calm, wearing nothing heavier than an open shirt. He wasn't watching us flee. He was staring down at his hands with a satisfied, almost relieved expression, like he'd found what he'd come for, like hurting himself had been nothing but an inconvenience. A small, cold smile crept across his face. I got the car started on the third try, the engine whining like it didn't want to live through the night either. Snow blasted the windshield, but I drove anyway, tires sliding, the motel fading behind us. We didn't speak for almost an hour. When the storm finally thinned and visibility returned, Linda turned toward me. Her voice was barely audible. "Mark, before you pounded on the door earlier, I checked your room." I glanced at her. "What about it?" She swallowed. "Your main door was open. Not the deadbolt, the latch. It was standing wide open." I jerked the car to the shoulder, the tires skidding on slush. My breath felt lodged in my throat. He had been in my room, not watching from outside. He was inside. That note wasn't a warning. It wasn't cautionary. It was mocking. "Your door is unlocked." As in, I've already been in there. We got back on the road and didn't stop until we hit Fargo. Neither of us slept. Neither of us reported anything. What would we tell police? That a man disappeared from a locked car and tried to claw his way through a motel floor? They'd laugh us out of the station. We finished the sales trip in silent survival mode. A month later, both of us quit. I couldn't handle the travel anymore. Linda couldn't stay on the road at all. But here's the part I've never told anyone. 2 weeks after we resigned, I drove past the junction again just to prove to myself it was all in my head. The gas station was boarded up. The motel was condemned. Snow had blown halfway up the doors, but something was written across the frost-covered office window. Just a few words, etched with a fingertip from inside the building. Still warm inside. I didn't stop the car, didn't slow down, didn't blink. Now, whenever I stay in a hotel, no matter how modern or safe, I check everything. The door, the lock, the windows, the vents. I look under the bed, behind the curtains, and yes. Sometimes I press my ear to the floor, just to make sure there's nothing beneath it. Because I learned something in that storm, something I can't unlearn. There are things out there that don't want shelter from the cold. They want entry. They wait for storms because storms hide their footsteps. And the moment you act polite, the moment you ignore that instinct in your gut, that's when they come inside. My story is about a long, lonely winter spent house-sitting for my wealthy and eccentric Uncle Arthur. He owned an isolated 3-story cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. It was more of a fortress than a house, built from thick cedar logs and huge panels of structural glass, overlooking a remote, desolate valley the locals called Blind Pass. I took the job because I was broke, and Uncle Arthur was paying a fortune to have someone stay there, feed his 2 enormous, placid Newfoundland dogs, named Bear and Shadow, and make sure the place didn't freeze over. The rule was simple. Stay until the spring thaw. Do not leave the property, and do not let anyone in. He was a paranoid man, but his money was good. I arrived in late November, just as the first serious snow began to fall. The house was magnificent, with state-of-the-art security, a ring of perimeter cameras, motion sensors, and an industrial-grade steel front door. The only connection to the outside world was a satellite phone with a limited data plan and a landline, which was only used for emergencies. The first month was paradise. It was a life of silent reading, playing chess against the computer, and long, solitary walks with the dogs along the snowed-in access road. The valley below was always quiet, a vast white blanket of untouched snow, framed by endless dark pine forests. Then, just before Christmas, the weather turned biblical. A relentless storm, the kind that makes the news, slammed into the Cascades, trapping me completely. Snow piled up to the second-floor windows, and the wind screamed like a tortured spirit. I was truly, utterly alone, which was, initially, a source of comfortable curiosity. The shift began on Christmas Day. I was sitting by the colossal stone fireplace, watching a downloaded movie, when the landline phone rang. It was an old-fashioned, rotary dial phone, and its ring was a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the silence. I picked it up on the second ring. "Hello? This is the Arthur residence." The only response was a low, staticky hiss. I assumed it was a cross line or a weather-related malfunction. I was about to hang up when a voice, flat and entirely devoid of emotion, spoke. The silence is loud. It was a man's voice, not my uncle's, and it was unnervingly close, as if he were standing just outside the front door, speaking into an intercom. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked, my blood suddenly cold. "Just a traveler. Lost," the voice replied. "The road is gone. We need shelter." "I'm sorry. This is a private residence, and the road is completely impassable. You need to call emergency services. They can airlift you out," I said, trying to sound firm and reasonable. "We have no phone. We saw your lights. We have been watching the valley for days. Your lights are a beacon. The dogs are beautiful," the voice said, the last sentence delivered with the same flat, chilling monotone as the rest. I looked at Bear and Shadow, who were sleeping peacefully on the rug. They hadn't barked. They hadn't even lifted their heads. My uncertainty turned instantly to dread. This wasn't a lost hiker. This was a direct, observed threat. "I need you to leave the property now," I said, my hand gripping the heavy receiver. "We will not leave. We can't. But we won't try the main door. Too heavy. We will try the glass. On the second floor." "You forgot to lock the glass slider," the voice said, and then a dry, unsettling chuckle that ended abruptly. The line went dead. I dropped the phone and ran up the spiral staircase. The chalet's main feature was a row of 6 huge, tempered glass sliding doors that opened onto a long balcony on the second floor. I had spent hours photographing the valley view through them. I checked every one. They were all locked. But as I reached the last door on the far end, the one overlooking the thickest part of the forest, I saw something that turned my stomach. Scraped into the deep snow on the balcony, right outside the glass, were 3 neat, parallel lines. Someone had been standing out there, and they had just, casually, run 3 lines down the length of the balcony with a finger or a small stick. It was a horrifying sign of presence, a silent message that they had been there, they had seen me, and they knew the structure of the house. I looked down at the snowdrifts below the balcony. They were massive, easily 15 feet high, banked right up against the house. It would have been a near impossible, hours-long climb, but someone had done it. The fear was paralyzing. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know how they knew about the slider lock, a lie, but a perfect psychological trigger. And I didn't know why the dogs hadn't reacted. I ran back downstairs and found the security monitor. I frantically cycled through the camera feeds. The perimeter cameras were entirely blinded by the storm. The screens were nothing but static snow. The motion sensors were useless, either buried or constantly triggered by the swirling snow. The house was truly blind. I grabbed the satellite phone and tried to call the police. The satellite connection, reliable until now, was dead. The heavy, wet snow and ice had likely knocked the dish out of alignment or covered it entirely. I was trapped in a house with a voice that knew my location, knew the dogs, and knew how to climb a snowdrift taller than a bus. I spent the next 48 hours in an adrenaline-fueled state of high alert. I secured every door and window, barricading the second-floor slider with the heaviest piece of furniture I could find, my uncle's antique bronze telescope stand. Bear and Shadow continued to sleep and eat as if nothing were wrong, their placid indifference adding another layer of psychological horror. Were they deaf, or had they accepted this person's presence? The only time the phone rang was once every 12 hours. Exactly. Always the same voice. Always the same chilling, monotonous cadence. The telescope is a beautiful distraction. I had spent an hour looking through it. You should not reheat fish, it smells. I had microwaved leftover salmon. The golden retriever would have barked, Uncle Arthur's previous dog. Each call was a new piece of evidence that they were not just near the house, but observing the smallest, most intimate details of my life. They were patient. They were close. And worst of all, they were silent, except for the calls. The breaking point came late on the third night. I was huddled in the kitchen, the most structurally sound room, holding a heavy, iron fireplace grate. I was exhausted, having not slept for 3 days. The phone rang. 11:58 p.m., right on schedule. I picked it up, my hands shaking. I was beyond screaming. I just wanted the truth. What do you want? To be warm, the voice replied. Then, it added something new, something that caused a full-blown mental panic. We are coming into the mudroom now. There is a way in, a very small way in. The mudroom. It was a forgotten utility closet off the kitchen, with a small high-up vent for the dryer exhaust, a 6-inch metal flap leading outside. It was the only unbarred opening in the entire structure. No human could fit, but the voice's calm certainty crushed my last shred of self-control. You're lying. No one can fit in the vent, I screamed into the phone. The voice didn't respond with a challenge. Instead, it whispered a name. Arthur. The phone dropped from my hand, clattering onto the counter. I didn't care about the vent. I cared about the name. Arthur. That was my uncle's name, but the voice had whispered it with a familiarity that suggested intimacy or possession. I turned slowly toward the hallway leading to the mudroom, and that's when I saw it. Shadow, the smaller of the two Newfoundlands, was standing in the doorway, blocking the passage to the mudroom, and he was not sleeping. He was rigid, all 4 legs locked, his head lowered, and he was making the lowest, most terrifying growl I have ever heard. A deep, constant, guttural rumble that didn't sound like a dog at all. And right behind Shadow, just visible around the corner of the wall, I saw it. A small, dark shape, about the size of a football, rolling silently across the floor toward the vent. I screamed and lunged for the dog, pulling him back violently. As I did, the dark shape disappeared with a quiet, sickening scuttle into the darkness of the mudroom. I kicked the mudroom door shut and threw the heavy iron grate against it, securing it with a massive, antique steel vise my uncle used for repairs. My survival instinct had taken over completely. I was sealing myself off. I looked at the dog. Shadow was quiet now, his head tilted, his massive dark eyes staring into the dark corner of the kitchen. And then he did the most human thing. He turned and looked at me with a profound, terrifying expression, not of fear, but of profound reflection, as if to say, "It's already here, you idiot." I fled the kitchen, pulling Bear and Shadow with me, and locked myself in the master bedroom, which was on the 3rd floor, with a double reinforced door and no external windows. I sat there for the rest of the night, listening to the silence. No calls, no footsteps, no scraping, just the wind and the knowledge that something small, dark, and utterly foreign was somewhere in the lower part of the house, patiently waiting. The next morning, the snow stopped. The sun was out, blindingly bright, and the world was utterly silent. I spent an hour trying to get the satellite phone to work, and finally, miraculously, I got a dial tone. I called my uncle, Arthur. "I need to leave. Someone has been watching the house. They're inside," I said, my voice hoarse. Arthur was calm, too calm. "Just leave the dogs. Lock the main door." The thaw is coming. You're fine. They knew your name. They whispered it on the phone. Arthur. And they were coming through the dryer vent. A long silence on the line. Then, Arthur sighed. A tired, old man's sigh. James, the dryer vent. It's a decoy. It's not the way in. It's the way out, he said. Listen to me very carefully. When you leave, do not look in the mudroom. Do not. Just take the snowmobile and go. Lock everything. But what about what was in there? I pleaded. It's just a creature of the cold, James. Harmless, until it finds its warmth. That's why I hired you. I need the house occupied, and I needed an observer. You were an expensive canary, Arthur said, the same cold, flat tone as the man on the phone. Now go, before it gets too comfortable. I hung up, feeling a wave of nausea and a terrible persistent fear I had not been a caretaker, but bait. I packed nothing but my warmest clothes. I kissed Bear and Shadow goodbye, not wanting to put them in the snowmobile. I walked past the kitchen, past the bolted mudroom door, and out the steel front door. I drove the snowmobile for 3 hours until I hit the first plowed road. I didn't stop. I never looked back. I never asked Arthur for the rest of my pay, and I never spoke to him again. I'm fine now, but the silence of an empty house is something I can no longer tolerate. I live in a city apartment, where the constant noise is a comfort. The silence of the valley was not a lack of sound. It was the sound of something waiting, something that could see, something that could whisper your host's name, and something that was willing to use you as a human furnace. And I still wonder, was the voice on the phone Arthur, playing a cruel, controlling game? Or was it the creature of the cold, using my uncle's name, having found its warmth, and settling in for a long, patient winter? I don't know the answer, but every winter, when the snow falls, I have the same terrifying thought. I left the dryer vent open, and whatever it was, it used it as the way out, and it's looking for a new observer.